Hello and welcome to the new episode of A New Frontier. I'm Joe Lambogieva. We have Max Sinclair. I was away for a couple of episodes, so today I get the honors of introducing our guest. But before that, hey Max, how are you doing?
Good. I don't know if you managed to catch up the last episodes, but it was an absolute founder bro out. Just had all the
Yeah,
founder bros on, so it's good to restore a bit of balance and
yes, a
you know
little bit
your
of
feminine touch to the
gentle feminine
podcast.
energy.
Yeah,
Nice. All right. Well, today we have a very special guest who I am so excited to introduce. I've met him at a couple of conferences. I had awesome chats, not just about Amazon and marketplaces, but just in life in general. He's a really interesting person. First of all, what I really found really interesting is that he spent most of his career, as he says, as a button-up corporate guy. You would never guess that by speaking to him. And after that, after exiting a Fortune 300 company, he joined an outdoor product brand called Go Zero. And he spent 4 years discovering essentially the power of physical products and brands, and generally getting geared up with everything to do with sales channels like Amazon. After this, it's like, I mean, honestly, when I say who is the guy, you know very well. He has started, scaled, and exited numerous Amazon-centric channels. And as I said, he's had like a really interesting path by selling most of his belongings and trying to live his life without stuff, which is amazing. So also he has an amazing YouTube channel. I am going to just bring him to stage. This is Adam Runquist or Heist. Okay. Hi,
Joe
Adam.
and Max. Hey guys, great to be here. Appreciate the intro as well.
How's it going?
Doing awesome. How are you?
Yeah, pretty good. So I am really excited to actually hear about your path because, yeah, when I read your bio, I would never have guessed that you've had, I guess, a more of a corporate start. So I wanted to ask you, like, how did this transition happen? Like, how did you move from corporate into basically e-commerce and physical products, like, and what was the change in sort of the mindset that you had to go through to get to that transformation?
Yeah, really good question. And I guess to unpack it, I've got to kind of inject my life and experience kind of the last 5 years. So I guess some things I didn't know at the time, but I know more kind of retrospectively. But I think to that point, I think like we all have something inside of us and then like normal life takes on, right? Like you kind of like, I think you have that wonderment as a kid. They say like kind of up until like 8, 9 years old, you're basically like a blank slate. And I guess living life truly is like a soul or human should live. And then rightfully so, you have things that get injected into your life to like make society work. So you've got your parents, you've got school, and you've got all these structures, and then you go to university and you get a job, and then you get the mortgage and the dogs. And like it was funny, the time that I started my Amazon brands, I think I was probably mid 30s ish, somewhere in that range. And I was kind of like, what happened? Because like I always had this like questioning spirit, and like something's like about the way that the world works doesn't really fit for me, but you kind of just get sucked into it. And so that was my story. And kind of at that point, basically, again, I was working for a really cool brand. I had like a lot of awesome things happen in my career, was content, was happy. And most people outside looking in would be like, yeah, it's amazing. But there was a Friday afternoon, I was working in Utah at the time. I love kind of the outdoors, like to ski and mountain bike and stuff. And I think it was starting to get nice out anyway. And it was like prime time, like snow, like, or it was a prime time mountain biking day. It was like 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And I was looking out in my office at these beautiful mountains. I'm like, man, I just want to go for like a mountain bike ride. Like, I don't care if I have to work till like 10, 11 p.m. Like, it wasn't a work thing. It was just like, that's like, felt like the right thing to do. And like, as a human being, it would be nice to get outside. But, you know, you have the obligations of normal life. You know, I had a large team and meetings, and like, it would be weird if I went out in the middle of the day. And I don't know why it hit me, but it did that day. And I just like, I don't know if can I swear on this podcast? I don't know. I can
Go
change
for it.
it.
We swear a lot.
I basically had this like feeling like this is fucked up. Like this is not like a human. So anyways, so that Friday, I basically made a decision like, look, if I don't go for it now, when am I going to go for this? Like, I kind of had this like this is going to be my life for 20, 30 years. And it's a cool life. Like, I don't want to say that it was bad. And I was very grateful for it. But I was like, if I don't do it now, when am I going to do it? So the time I'd accumulated a lot of experience working with Chinese factories, Amazon e-com stuff, kind of understood that business and kind of got my head around it. And so I'm like, you know what, I'm just going to go and do this on my own. So basically almost 2 years to the day after that, I sold my first business and was able to kind of say bye to corporate. But I think to answer the root of your question, I think there's this thing inside of all of us that nudges us towards the path that we're supposed to be on. And it's very, very easy to ignore it, especially as life and real world dynamics and structures come into play. And again, not to knock those things, there's some good things about them too. But I was like, it started there and I finally listened to it. I don't know what it was about that day, but I was like able to listen to it and then kind of fundamentally changed what happened for my life that point forward. So
yeah, I love how you can pinpoint that like moment where like it switched in your mind. And I had a similar one where I was at Amazon, not sure if you knew, and again in the corporate world, and I had this offer to leave the corporate world to join this like startup program, basically quit my job, go into the unknown, see what happened. And I was really wrestling with it, and literally the same. It was like it was a moment where I was with my friends and we go cold water plunging on a Saturday morning, and I was talking to my friends like, oh, I don't know if I should take this offer or not. And literally, like as I jumped into the water, I just realized, like, had this epiphany. I've got to just like jump into like this new life and like see what happens. And I got out the ponds and I was like, I'm gonna do it. So it's amazing how like you just remember that like specific moment. It's a beautiful thing in a way, and it's such a normal day. Like I do that every weekend, but at the same time, like you know that lives with you. So when you did leave, was that moment for you to start a brand on the side, or did you like quit, or how did it work?
Yeah, so I was fairly lucky. I kind of call myself a chicken shit entrepreneur. Like I'm definitely not like an eat glass for breakfast, like love risk and like burn the ships and let's figure this out. And like I'm not that guy. I mean, the tough transition for me was I was making really good money and it was a really good career path, and it like had all of the accoutrements that would make you happy and safe and content. And so I had to balance that with like, okay, I know that this doesn't feel right, but it's really safe, comfortable, and fulfilling in a lot of respects. But I know I want to get here because of the liberation and all the other things. But I didn't like, I'm quitting and I'll figure this out. I basically started a brand and it was Home Goods, the one that I exited. And then about a year, and I loved the business challenge and like the personal challenge of figuring out that on Amazon, but I wasn't really in love with the brand, the customer, the products. I mean, it was a great brand, I'm proud of it, but it was just like home good stuff. So about a year in, I started much more of a brand and product centered around the things I care about. So I was really big into cycling at the time, kind of still dabble in it, but we did a lot of like cycling accessories, like sports outdoor stuff. So it was much more like the business passion and then like the customer product passion came together. So I had that one that I'd started kind of a year in. So basically when I exited the Home Goods brand, I had the other brand, which was running for about a year. And I'd also started, it was during COVID. So I'd started doing kind of YouTube as kind of a personal exploration project as well during that time. So I had something to fall back on, both kind of financially to kind of, have some income coming in as well as just purpose, So I think, had I not have had those things, I don't think I would have left, but it kind of was a nice, it was like a multi-stage transition that kind of had a backdrop already in place kind of as I went to each stage. So it worked for me as a chicken shit entrepreneur. I know the entrepreneurs I'm inspired by are much more burn the boats, but I'm kind of somewhere in between.
And I guess what I find fascinating is that you've built also yourself as a content creator and as an educator in the space, and your channel. I mean, I knew about you way before I met you from just like watching some of your YouTube videos, and you have tons of followers. So like, how did you, well, this is kind of like a skill that you develop, but like, how did you develop the skill to be also a content creator who is confident on being on camera and like being essentially a YouTube personality, if you wish?
Yeah. So I think like, honestly, I think we're like the sum of our stacked human experiences over time. And so how I arrived at that was literally everything that happened in my life up to that point. And but I think there's some more definitive ones. I mean, I went to business school. I was in corporate jobs. Basically, I mean, I was basically in meetings and doing presentations for a living. I mean, that's when you get to a certain point in your career, you're not really pushing the buttons. You're literally in 7+ hours of meetings, and you're kind of trying to build a willing coalition within an internal company, and you're presenting a lot. You're having dialogues. You're kind of battling out ideas, things like that. So I think that was naturally in me all along, and it was certainly refined through my career. And so I think that medium of like taking all this information, applying it into business, and then how would I describe this to somebody? How would I explain the strategy? How could I help somebody? How could I bring somebody along with me? I think that was just a skill that was naturally honed. And then because I was so fresh into my Amazon journey, like, hey, I'm going at this on my own, and I was really obsessed with it. I think when you have like that obsession, and I certainly had it when I started doing content, it just like, it's what you wake up wanting to do. You want to just, it's like your diary. You want to spill it out to the world and get it out of you. So and I think the other important thing that was really, really important, and we had a conversation about this too, Joe, in Seattle. I knew that it could be something. Like, I wasn't just doing it for fun. It wasn't a charity project. I knew that there was probably something business related that would have come out of it. And that was definitely something that would have ultimately had to reveal itself. Otherwise, it wouldn't have made a ton of sense to keep going. But it was really fueled by personal development. Like, hey, I've got something to say to the world. There's something inside of me. I've gotten a lot of value from this medium, from other people to help build my businesses, because I had a corporate background and kind of, I think, a different take. At that stage, Amazon was a little bit more flash and dash, kind of like hustler entrepreneur style. And I was kind of brought a little bit more of like the professional background. So I'm like, look, I'm just going to turn on the camera. I'm going to do this once a week. It was super weird, the first video, like staring into a camera. It was like super weird, but like kind of getting over those things from a personal development standpoint, figuring out my voice, figuring out what I cared about talking about, figuring out what resonated with people, figuring out how I could help people, figuring out what felt good. That first year was about that. And I kind of just believe like, look, I'm going to do this a week for a year. If I don't like it, I'll stop. If something doesn't feel right about it, I'll stop. But I kind of feel like something's here. So I think it's like, again, similar to the starting the business thing. It's like there's these threads that are inside of you that you just kind of want to pull on, and you don't know where it's going to lead, which is very scary, because kind of going into the unknown, especially people that are business folks, like you like to calculate things and know what's going to happen next and like predict things. But literally just being like, hey, there's a thread here. I'm going to pull on it. I'm going to lean into it, give myself to it, and just see what happens. And that's where the special things in my life have certainly occurred. And I think the YouTube content creation spectrum was a prime example of that. Like, so many amazing things happened from it, but it started with literally like, let's do this for a year and see what happens. And then the see what happens turns into special things that turn into other things, and life takes on a life of its own. So
yeah, I'm surprised you asked that, Joe, given you're a LinkedIn influencer and big, you already know your social media personality. So Adam, if it's okay, do you mind if I try and get some, or understand the kind of timelines of all of this?
Sure.
To help the listeners process the the conversation. So when did you first like look out of the window and see like you wanted to go on the mountain bike? Like, do you remember what year it was?
Yeah, it's funny. I'm trying to like do reverse math in my head. So I think it was roughly 5 or 6 years ago. So I sold coming up on 3 years actually. So almost 3 years ago I sold.
Yeah.
So backing into that, yeah, it would have been 5 years ago that I was probably like a year or two into the journey with that physical products brand. Kind of had been to China, became very familiar with WeChat and how everything worked with logistics, and really dug into Amazon.
It's like 2020, like COVID.
Yeah, like just before COVID. So yeah, so I was kind of like almost a year into my brand when COVID hit.
Okay. Yeah.
And then it was a year after that I sold. So yeah, call it like 5 years ago is kind of my first kind of full kind of let's dig into this.
That makes sense. So, I mean, I think, I was at Amazon during COVID, and I think that was a massive shift in terms of Amazon, not just selling on Amazon, but like the company ballooned. I think the company like grew to like 2.5 million people. And it was like, when I joined, 350,000. So kind of like e-commerce blew up, like the aggregators blew up.
Yeah.
The Amazon as an internal organization kind of just like hired loads of people during COVID to just, manage all the demand. So how have you seen like Amazon change from when you started to where we are now?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's kind of interesting because I'm not like the 2015-ish kind of Amazon person. I think that's like I would call it Generation One, which is basically it's kind of those purebred entrepreneurs I talked about that like
Wild West is what
literally
we
are
called it internally.
so yeah, they're so fascinating and cool. Like I just love conversing with them, but it's also like people that literally could not work a normal job. Like there's no freaking way that they could like be. So you're kind of dealing with those folks, and it's just like yeah, like I'm gonna order like 30 grand worth of this thing on Alibaba, like put my label on it, and like no one else is selling it. So then I'm now doing 200 grand a month on that, like gunslinger stuff. So that was the era before me. I kind of came in, and again, you always think you're too late with Amazon, but I was like, oh, maybe I kind of missed the boat on this because it was starting to mature a little bit when I got into it. But to give you contrast, when I first started selling on Amazon, there was no, I would say the logistics was the biggest difference, the first big shift, which was driven by COVID. So when I first started selling on Amazon, you could send in whatever you wanted. Now you would pay storage fees at month 5, 6 plus that would make it you're disincentivized to have too much stuff in there. But ultimately, order from China, the container gets to the US, it goes straight into Amazon, goes into a single warehouse. You don't have to calculate, you don't have to have a 3PL. I would say the supply chain was pretty simple. Shift number one, and I would say that was the beginning of what I would call the professionalization of Amazon, and we've continued to see that graduate in the years since. But because, to your point, there was all this demand and there was limits on employees and workers and restrictions from a health code standpoint, as well as literally physical space, because there was so much stuff being shipped in the boomerang after COVID, that logistics started to become a thing. And I would say for most Amazon sellers now, like I'd say a solid 60% of your brain power is on logistics, like staying in stock, optimizing costs. Where do I stage stuff? Where do I move it? Logistics, POs, the boring stuff, but the plumbing that keeps a business going. And then I think the more recent shifts have included both operations as well as, I would say, marketing. So the first one was just obviously SERP changed quite a bit. Organic search pages on Amazon kind of coming out of COVID. I think Amazon realized, rightly so, to the chagrin of us as Amazon sellers, that look, we got basically super high margin, easy money if we sell ads, and that's a lot easier than building warehouses and shipping stuff. So ads became a predominant part of being successful on Amazon because you didn't have organic ranking that you could rely on completely. A lot more, I would say, retail-centric brands had to get into Amazon during that period because their stores were shut down. So you have bigger money coming into play with agencies that are, and their world is like dumping money on ads and like playing the brand play. And then I think more recently, kind of the, again, additional layer of professionalization is just the complexity around operational costs and margins. When the math is so easy that you don't even need to calculate it because you're making money, it's like whatever, like everything's a rounding error. But I think what we've seen over the last years, things aren't a rounding error, especially when you stack like 8 of them together. So I think it started with logistical kind of professionalization. It's gotten into marketing, omni-channel stuff. And now it's just like, you just got to understand how to run a normal business, which I don't think you needed to know in previous eras of Amazon.
And in terms of that, like, what do you see then is going to be what do you foresee to be the next biggest changes for Amazon sellers coming up now, like from say 2025? How do you see the whole category changing?
Yeah, I think like for me, it's kind of twofold. I think it was at the product level, it was a lot easier to get away with very minimal differentiation and like offer creation back in the day, because again, there was so much demand, a limited number of items on the shelf to satisfy that demand. And so if you understood Amazon and were comfortable, sending 30 grand to somebody in China and shipping a container over, you're pretty much good to go. So I think number one, you've got to be a lot more professional and thoughtful about how you construct an offer. And that goes from, how do I develop the product? What's different about it? How it's being used? How can I capture somebody's attention? Scanning on Amazon to click on my image. So creative comes into play, voice comes into play. So I would say at the product level, there's that. And then the second thing is just really, like I talked about, like a more general constructed view of this is a multifaceted business. And so you've got to think on Amazon, off Amazon, what am I looking to achieve? How do I structure my operations so that I have enough margin? How do I leverage employees and systems in a smart way that enable me to still stay lean, but also kind of put my big boy pants on, so to speak? So I think that there's changes at the product offer level that are definitely predominant, and I think that there's structural changes in terms of how you operate a business. And I think just beyond that, it's like a sophistication level around proportioning and toggling between paid media and organic. And I think that that's a balancing act that the people that are able to figure that out and command the margins that are necessary to cash flow and sustain the cash turn in a physical products business, I think that's kind of the sweet spot now. Always has been, but it matters more now, if that makes sense.
I couldn't agree more about this professionalization of Amazon, and I completely agree. Kind of a question as a business owner: how do you think about defensibility and building a moat in a e-commerce business, like for an Amazon seller?
Good question. I think you can think about it in different ways at different stages of both the business as well as the macro environment. I think that we're in a period of survival / like, let's reorient the chairs a little bit. And I say that because you alluded to the aggregator environment and all the money that kind of spilled in, $4+ billion that spilled in during COVID to acquire brands, and the multiples were pretty satisfactory. That market, while it still exists, doesn't really exist beyond large $10 million plus D2C scale businesses, and even then the multiples aren't great. So I think we're kind of in a reset period right now where it's kind of survival. I mean, moats matter. You got to think about that stuff. But I think right now it's basically like, hey, look, the dynamics of this business have changed substantially. There's not really lucrative exits. So if that's not my goal, what is my goal? My goal is to take a step back, look at the changes that have happened, both with the financials of my business as well as the broader dynamics of strategy and competitive marketplaces, and like, where do I fit here? And how can I survive? And how can I maintain a healthy business? How can I operate it and go to market in a way that I feel comfortable with as a business owner? I think that's the stage that we're in. It's not like gurgling water survival, but it's kind of like, look, I've got time to take pause here and reevaluate what this all means. I think coming out of that exploration period, which is probably going to be the next 18 months, I think how I think about moats and defensibility is much more around having a defensible business. I think people have looked at having like a defendable listing on Amazon, having organic ranking that holds, like all of those things. I don't think that that's as sophisticated as it needs to be now, because it doesn't frankly work. So I think now it's much more about, okay, first of all, is my business defensible in the sense that I can stay in stock, I've got operations, I understand my math, I've got enough cash coming in, the margins are satisfactory. Like, I can run a business and I've got money coming in and I can continue to kind of spill it into the business and grow. And a lot of people can't even get past that point. That's why I'm like, talking about true defensibility doesn't really matter if that doesn't exist. So I think that's like the first layer of it. And then I think the next layer is like, look, I've got to be a traditional D2C business on Amazon now. Like, you can't get away with shitty images. You can't get away with shitty products. You can if they're really cheap, but again, then you're not going to satisfy the business math for the cash to make sense. So I think it's there's much more of an onus on, I would say, creative defensibility moving forward, which is, how can I create something and continue to iterate, improve, and master it such that it makes my media buying easier and less expensive. It makes my organic rank better. It makes my efforts off of Amazon, which give me some differentiation and some safety. So I think there's layers and stages to it. I think some bad advice that I've seen is like, you've got to build a brand and you got to do like, and it's like, dude, there's this guy that's like doing $2 million a year, and he was doing $400,000 or $500,000. He or she was doing $400,000 or $500,000, and now they're doing 80. Like, okay, we can talk about defensibility, but let's solve the fact that I'm making 80 when I used to make 500 to get that right. And then you can kind of ease your way into, I would say, higher tiers of defensibility.
And to like continue on that, so like, what do you think are the biggest factors that are essentially affecting this defensibility or making people go into more of a survival mode? What is tanking right now, like revenues and profits, in your perspective?
Yeah, I think the real conundrum that most Amazon sellers have, there's obviously exceptions to every rule, but I think the biggest challenge is that the price with which you need to hold your product at to have optimal and profitable conversion rates and pay-per-click spend, as well as optimal sales velocity and conversion for organic rank, are oftentimes not sustainable because of the margin structure changes that have happened in the business. So you've got this like, okay, you're kind of drowning, but the only way out to grab the life preserver, a la increase your price, is basically going to deflate the thing that you grabbed, because you're now going to have more expensive cost per pay-per-click. You're going to place lower volume orders. Your costs are more expensive. Your logistics are more expensive, and you're not ranking and getting the organic sales. So I think that's probably the fundamental kind of challenge that people have. And the way out of that, in my view, is number one, you've got to tidy up the math that goes into the business and really kind of get tight on operations. And it starts there. And then I think it's like, okay, well, how do I create an offer, brand, etc., that maybe doesn't reside in the top, 2 to 5 spots on organic SERP, but can survive in the middle, caters to a particular customer that is willing to pay up for it, such that I've got the margin structure where I don't need to be top of page. I don't need to, convert at, 20% A cost for this thing to work. I've got more meat on the bone because I'm offering something different, better, etc. So I think that's probably where most Western sellers have to gravitate towards to survive. But there's obviously an interim period, and I think we're in that interim period, which is like you still have a catalog that's full of these other things that aren't quite there to command the bigger price. But how do I make them survive and kind of continue to facilitate those other growth opportunities and like future expansion on product offerings that do meet people? So that's how I'm thinking about it.
Complicated question, but you are sitting in Austin, Texas, so I want to ask it. How do you think that the tariffs that Trump may or may not bring in is going to affect Amazon sellers and this kind of P&L that we're talking about? Do you think it could benefit them, or do you think there's going to be challenges? Like, how do you see it playing out?
Yeah, it's very interesting, and I think it's unprecedented. I think it's there's so many moving parts that are so dramatically different than how the world operates and how the U.S. political system and international trade is operated, that I think that no one really knows. I mean, when you rip the Band-Aid like that, catastrophe could happen. Unintended positive consequences could happen, or somewhere in between. I suspect where this lands is, I think in the short term, I don't think there's a huge impact on Amazon sellers directly for a couple of reasons. Number one, when the original Trump tariff and 301 stuff came in, and you had a product that was, 2-3% tariff went up to 25%. And you had the crazy logistics and containers cost 20 grand and all the craziness that happened during COVID. That was rough, because that just wasn't something that was ever seen as a calculation that would happen. But I think that we got through that. We survived it. And so when I see like a 10% tariff on stuff from China, I'm kind of like, whatever. Like I don't like it. And I know that a lot of people, it's going to cost them a lot more money and it's going to erode margins. So I don't want to say it's a nothing burger. But of the list of things that I would be worried about in terms of the changes economically that come out of it, I haven't lost or thought much about it since lost much sleep or thought much about it. I think where it gets a little bit unknown, and this is where I'll give you kind of thoughts on where I think it might go, but it's hard to say, is like, so you have the Temu stuff shutting down. I think everyone, if you're on LinkedIn, everyone's like, oh, this is like amazing. They closed the loophole, and like Temu and Shein and all these guys are going, like, I don't think that 95% of Amazon sellers that I know, Western sellers, would ever run into a competition scenario where those kind of products, both in terms of category as well as price and cheapness, are ever a direct threat to who's searching for their stuff on Amazon. So for me, that was a total nothing burger. Like, I think it's beneficial not having, although again, it flip-flops. I don't even know if it's still enacted or not. Like, people that would ship stuff from Mexico D2C under $800 have no tariff. I think in the D2C world, it's certainly much more significant. But for Amazon sellers, I think that that's frankly a nothing burger. I think where it gets really interesting is, and we're probably talking 12 months out. That's why I kind of think the next little bit's not the end of the world. But I think what happens when the real consequences of the consumer price index, of inflation, of layoffs, lack of jobs. I mean, if you're talking like there's going to be 50,000 plus federal workers that could potentially be unemployed. That's going to be a drag on the system. There's going to be a lot less jobs created, all those things. So I think those consequences, which are second, third order consequences, I think are something much more to be paying attention to, because if the consumer price index goes up, people don't have jobs as much and they're not making as much money and all their costs are going up around them. And you've got all these counter punches from international countries on goods that fundamentally matter for housing prices, food, shelter, basic necessities of being a human in modern world. You're not going to be shopping on Amazon as much. Or if you are shopping on Amazon, you're probably only getting the stuff that you truly need. And if you're only getting the stuff that you truly need, you're probably getting the low end prices, which is a game that we, again, can't participate in like we could because of the structures we just talked about. So I think the systemic, deeper level, secondary macroeconomic things are what I'm thinking much more about. And the tariffs, the Temu, all that stuff, I don't really think much about it. It's entertaining to pay attention to, but I'm not using it as a calculation variable directly right now in my business.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think we kind of follow the same people on Twitter and LinkedIn, and it seems in the Amazon sphere, a lot of sellers seem to be quite excited because they feel that this is going to hit Chinese sellers worse, and therefore US sellers are going to have some advantage if they're not being undercut anymore, and there's a lot of stuff on the taxes. But I agree, like it's interesting to think about the second and third order consequences.
And to that point, honestly, like I know a lot of really smart people that I really respect and that are better than me in many respects. I've also spent a lot of time in China and understand that selling community and just the broader business culture. If you want to do a holding your breath contest, Chinese sellers will beat Western sellers every time. And I mean this actually, I mean there's I guess business ethics and integrity things that I personally don't ascribe to that would make that possible, a la underwriting invoices so that the monetary value of the goods is lower, so a tariff hit doesn't really hit in the same way. If your product is written as $2, not $10, it doesn't cost you $1, it costs you 20 cents when a 10% tariff comes in. So there's things like that maybe I don't agree with, but there's stuff that I do agree with, which is the long-term resilient nature of a lot of the Chinese business culture, that it's like they're willing to hold their breath a lot longer than we are, and they're willing to find ways to survive in a way that most Western sellers aren't. So I kind of find it honestly humorous when it's like, we got them now. Like, okay, they can't, like, it's like, it's going to cost you more than it's going to cost them. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I kind of agree. I think like they will persevere. I mean, if you look at Chinese history and like, the whole mentality around Chinese culture, I think they'll be fine. Yeah. So I have been like browsing a lot of WhatsApp groups and LinkedIn discussions. So there's 3 things that Amazon sellers are talking about right now, which is tariffs. We've covered one. Yeah. TikTok and Rufus. So like, shall we move into TikTok and then go for Rufus at the end?
Yeah. So go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. Cool. No. So like, what is your prediction on what's going to happen with TikTok? And let's say if it does disappear, which I don't think it would, like, what do you think is the next sort of move for sellers and just for the community?
Yeah, so this is a fairly easy one because I've actually never downloaded TikTok by choice. I've got my dopamine system. Yeah, my dopamine system has enough vices as it is, so I figured I shouldn't add one more to the mix. And I've actually never sold on TikTok Shop. I'm aware of the strategy. I'm kind of aware of the dynamics at play. So for me personally, in terms of my personal as well as business interests, I haven't directly kind of tested it for a lot of different reasons. Some of which I was kind of waiting to see what would happen structurally and regulatorily wise with it. But another reason was I just had a lower hanging fruit that made more sense for me to chase than that at that moment in time. In terms of broader predictions, I kind of have a tough time thinking that it's going to go anywhere. I think there's a lot of political benefit to TikTok for politicians, especially those in power, that I don't think they would want to subside that channel because it's basically a low cost / free PR algorithmically driven engine that I think did play a role in addition to a lot of other things in the other elections. So I don't think that they would want to see that bullet, so to speak, go away. But I do think that there's absolutely something interesting that's going to be transformative over the next couple years with social commerce for sure. Whether that exists on TikTok, whether Amazon or Meta can figure it out, whether there's a new kind of channel, whether Amazon does something, I definitely think that engine for changing the dynamic from somebody typing in, this is the product descriptor, and I'm going to go search for it on Amazon, to as I live my life and consume content, the algorithms know my interest, behaviors, fears, doubts, passions, all those things that make up a human being. It knows it better than they do themselves to type it into an engine, and it brings those things to them in a way that is so analytical and mathematical in terms of how that content's constructed that it basically wins, and it's almost this impossible engine. So I think that exists, it's real, it's not going away, and we need to figure it out. Specifically to TikTok and how that plays out, it's hard to say. I've kind of been like watch from afar and see what happens, but I think that we'll have to be in the game with social commerce as a broader strategy in the next couple of years for sure.
Yeah, actually, what you said was just brought a thought. I wrote an article last week about how AI is now studying our tone of voice, how we type, like basically what we are saying. And the next frontier will be probably AI that adopts what it says to us, how it communicates, the tone of voice, like what our preferences is, what is our psychology. And I think there was actually a study by Cambridge University who actually like proved that this is already happening with AI. And I think, it connects to what you said about this really data-driven, smart, analytical way that these social commerce platforms are going to target us. Why I absolutely would bet that will be directly connected with all of the data that AI is gathering right now with every interaction that we have on ChatGPT, Perplexity, or whatnot. So yeah, that's just really popped into my head when you said that.
Yeah.
So Max, shall we talk about Rufus?
Yeah, well, I was just looking at. Do you guys know Polymarket? Have you heard of this? It's like the crypto betting app. So it's a 69% chance apparently that TikTok gets banned in 2025, according to those betting on Polymarket. So I disagree with that. Maybe I've never used it. Maybe I'll go against it. I agree. I don't think it's going to go anywhere. I sadly, very, very sadly think that Trump cares too much about his own popularity to do what I think would be the right thing for the country and get rid of it. But anyway, we will. Rufus, what's your predictions on how Rufus is going to change Amazon and conversational search?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's funny. I've kind of toggled on this one. Like I kind of lump Cosmo and Rufus into the same. Cosmo being more the back end, Rufus maybe being the more UI kind of centric version of it. And they're different in different ways, but they kind of work together. When it first came out, I was kind of like, yeah, whatever. Like whenever you see Amazon trying to get cute with tech, they're good at a lot of things, especially like the business infrastructure plumbing of a business behind the scenes. And they're really insanely good at going after big markets and winning in them. I think that they're typically at least 3 years behind the traditional kind of media commerce world in terms of tech and how they look at things. So when it first came out, I was kind of like, yeah, like whatever. It was kind of like that. And then, Danny McMillan, who I'm really close to, I know you being in London, Max, you probably know him and have been to some of his stuff. Like he's super into the science of stuff and digging into the patents and all that stuff. And him and Awana and some other folks really came out with some super interesting stuff. I'm also really close with Vanessa Hung, who's really into that world as well. So as I started digging into that, I was kind of like, holy shit, like this maybe is a real big thing. I think now I'm probably somewhere in between. I think that they're executing it more fervently than I thought that they would have. And then I think that they're going to stick through it, and it matters to them for a lot of reasons. So I believe that to be true. I also don't think it's going to like fundamentally upend exactly how we need to operate and build products on Amazon. For me, I think what is readily apparent, there's a lot of unknowns on how things may shake out and with which level they kind of start to impact our businesses. I've been diving a lot into DSP. I've always been interested in the consumer facing data that Amazon houses on customers and how they use them. They've started to roll those out a lot into the Seller Central platform in terms of retargeting and other behavioral-based things from the ad platform. With DSP, it's absolutely insane, the kind of data that they have. I'm very much convinced that the biggest change coming out of some of these technical shifts, which are kind of UI facing, is that Amazon knows that if they can target the person, not just the search box typing into it, they have a better chance at slightly improving conversion rate. And so, a 2% improvement in the amount of people that purchase something on Amazon is a massive, massive, massive deal at their scale. And so I think that they're looking at this as a marginal gain strategy, not a we're going to completely upend how this platform operates. So for an Amazon seller, and how I'm thinking about this in terms of impact for me is that I think that once somebody logs into their Amazon shopping account, and some people aren't logged in, but once they're logged into their account and they're shopping, through the IP address as well as the device type, they're going to know whether it's the husband or the wife shopping. They're going to know their age, economics, everything they've bought in the last 10 years on Amazon, how their searches have changed, how their content consumption has changed on Prime, what they've said into Alexa, and a host of other different triggers and metrics that define behavioral shopping. And they're going to serve up both the recommendations as well as the organic search pages and ultimately the ads at that level of who they are as a user. So if I log into Amazon and I start shopping, and let's say that we're roommates, Max, and then we share the same account, and then you log in from your laptop and you start shopping, the organic search results, prompts, recommendations, what Rufus tells us to look for, etc., is going to be different. And so I think that becomes complicated for Amazon sellers and an exciting opportunity as well, in the sense that before it was like, okay, what's my organic rank? And then, got into geo rank, which was like one subtle difference that like, hey, I realize that I'm ranked differently in different geographies for a lot of different reasons. I think it's going to be that on steroids, where it's basically like you might directionally know whether, where you're standing from an organic ranking standpoint, but ultimately there's going to be an individualized organic rank depending on who's actually logged in and viewing, shopping for your product type. So that gets complicated, right? It gets like less analytical because you're not really going to know. And so you're going to directionally have to go into things like conversion rate. Be like, okay, what am I converting on? Okay, is there this kind of customer behavior type use case that I'm converting on more than others? And how do I need to lean into that strategy? For this customer type use case, whatever, I'm actually not winning and I've seen that eroding. Do I need to let that go? And do I need to change my ad spend based on that? Do I need to create a new offer, new product? Do I need to price differently? Do my images need to be differently? But you're going to be doing that directionally based on, I would say, more macro metrics like conversion rate and other business metrics. And it's less so going to be like, I know exactly how this product ranks and I'm just going to focus on rank, and that's going to bring my success. So it's gotten more complicated and it's got more qualitative in some respects. It's funny that like the data can either make things more quantitative or more qualitative. I think this is a situation where Amazon's data is going to make it more qualitative for Amazon sellers to really know where they're winning.
Yeah, I think that was one of the best descriptions of Cosmo that I've heard, and I've heard and given many of them. So kudos to you. So it sounds like you're very bullish on the impact of Cosmo, and you think that's going to be massive. I completely agree, and less so on the Rufus side.
Yeah.
I'm curious though, like because this, what you said about the fact that we won't be able to really track the usual metrics that we're tracking right now to like measure success, such as ranking, like how this kind of raises a whole question around the Amazon ecosystem and like just the operations of running an Amazon business. There's so many tools, that third-party tools that sellers are using, whether it's Helium 10 or Junko Scout or Data Dive or whatever, which are sort of like foundationally based off a lot of these metrics. So how do you see this whole ecosystem changing with this essentially qualitative rather than quantitative?
Maybe they need to use a new software, Joe. Maybe they need to use a new software, which is, purpose built for this new age of AI.
Yeah, but
perhaps, maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, my take on it is, I mean, those tools aren't going away. And like, I think one of the cool things about an Amazon business is it is the digital shelf, and there's so much analytics and insights that just don't exist on any other channel, including D2C, which is also ecom based. So that's always going to be around. I think what changes for me is that the analytics will tell you what's happening. And I think right now, or certainly historically, you've been able to look at what's happening, but also with a pretty sophisticated layer as to why it's happening. And Amazon's actually been phenomenal the last couple of years with the internal tools that they built within Amazon. And I think they'll continue to do that. So there's always going to be data, insights, and analytics. I think where it gets foggier or more rounded for me is that you're still going to know the why, like what's actually happening, or sorry, you're still going to know the like what's actually happening in my business. I think defining the why is going to be much more opaque. Now, there's going to be new data layers and new software or existing Amazon stuff that comes in that will help answer that why better. But I think it's going to be harder to answer the why using data and analytics. And it's just going to be a much more broader what is actually happening, if that makes sense. And I akin it to like the graduation or the maturity of this channel. Like, as an example, if you're selling on D2C, you know directionally how your ads are performing on paid, how unpaid is. You know your email list, you know your open rates, you know your conversions, you know if I run a deal. Like, there's a lot of analytics that go into a traditional e-com business. But you don't know a lot of stuff. You don't know how many of your competitors are selling. You don't know what exactly that customer's journey was to find your product. Like, there's still opaqueness, and even more so in traditional retail. Like, you don't know reviews. Like, there's a lot of things in shopping in a physical space that are data rich in some aspects, but really data light in others. So I kind of see Amazon foraying more into that universe where, as they kind of expand how they deliver products and their marketplace to customers, there's an underpinning of opaqueness with some of the why that's going to happen as a result of that, because it's going to be so micro that it's very difficult for an Amazon seller to have a singular approach to a listing, because the listing is basically serving up potentially 8,000 segments. And so it's like weaving your way into that universe and figuring out the why, I think, is going to be very interesting. And I think the people that figure it out and kind of get honed on it early are going to be the winners. And I think that's an exciting opportunity if you want to dig into it. Like, I don't think that there's been the kind of changes that we're seeing in that regard on like the technicalities of Amazon in a long time. And so I think it's going to be a pretty big reset for a lot of people and exciting journey for those that figure it out.
Moving away from kind of the Amazon stuff for a second, and maybe it's a bit of like a modern wisdom podcast question, but Jo said in her intro that you've sold most of your possessions and you're like traveling the world. So maybe a question like, what's it, and do you want any reflections on not owning possessions and maybe like what that is, having a consumer goods business and not having what possessions do you have and what have you got rid of?
Yeah. I mean, this could be a podcast episode unto itself, but I mean, the so what of it, rewinding a little bit to like earlier in the podcast. So I sold the brand, exited it, and it was a beautiful experience. Again, it's kind of weird and surreal when there's something that you imagine could be a possibility in the future in terms of changing your life, and then when it actually happens, it's like, whoa, that's really cool. So there's a beauty in it. But then there was also the next day of like, okay, I guess that's it. Kind of thought it would feel different. Like, you've summited the mountain and you're like, okay. So there was an emptiness that came and paralleled the beauty of that. And then I bought a Porsche GT3, like all the stupid shit that you do. And I ultimately kind of arrived after all of those things, like pretty unfulfilled. And I think this is a cliche that happens to a lot of people that have kind of achieved or climbed mountains that they thought would unlock things for them. But I had to go deeper when I'm like, okay, shit, that didn't really do it. That didn't matter. So what really does matter? So part of that introspective process was coming to the realization that like money matters and it's absolutely a tool. Like I think there's a study that correlates, like there's a 1-to-1 correlation to unhappiness if you don't have enough money to like sustain your life. So if you can't pay your rent, if your gas and utilities are getting shut off and you've got kids you can't take to the hospital, like of course you're going to be unhappy. But it's funny, like past meeting your basic needs. It could be $1 million, it could be 100 million, it could be 1 billion. There's a 1% correlation to happiness. And so I kind of, through my journey, had to discover that in some painful ways. And I was just like looking at my life. I'm like, you know what? Like, what does matter to me? And it's, you know, quiet mornings with a coffee, thinking about life. It's building businesses that I believe in and care about with teams that I'm really aligned with, and doing it in a way where I don't have a shitload of meetings. And that's like a free way to run and build a life in a business. It's, you know, enjoying cafes with friends. It's going to places that matter to me. It's listening to good music. It's having a good meal. Like, that's really that like centered, awesome feeling that I have. And so I'm like, why don't I try to reorient my life where I make that the priority and not the other stuff? And so I basically gave away and or sold most of my stuff. What I have left, I kept all of my guitars. So I've got like, that's the one I would say like over the top, man. I got like 5 or 6 guitars. So I kept my guitars. I kept my office stuff because I built out like a pretty cool office. I'm like, hey, when I finally have a home base again, it would be nice to have like a badass office. So I kept my office stuff. I kept one bike. I had like 8 bikes. I kept one bike. I kept my skis and like clothes and photos. So it's been fun, man. I think what I've realized is that stuff doesn't matter as much as you think.
Yeah.
I definitely love it when I visit my storage unit. I visit my storage unit like twice a year to like swap out like new season stuff, and it's fun to have that again when I'm there. But the things that you think matter don't matter.
Yeah, it's funny because I like, as I referenced Modern Wisdom, I was listening to a podcast earlier today, and he was talking about this, and it's one of those lessons in life which he says, and I think it's true, that everyone has to learn individually.
Of course,
so like
yeah.
I can hear you saying this, and you know, like, and it's one of those lessons. I bet people who are listening are not going to be like, oh, you know what, I'm not going to try and get my business to 8 figures or 7 figures.
And I realize how douchey it sounds, by the way, too. Like, I was like, oh, like a douchebag, but it's true. It's like, it doesn't matter.
But it is like, if you listen to successful people again, or people on their deathbeds or whatever, again and again, they say those messages, and then everyone kind of has to individually come to that conclusion in a way. Like, if they get to that point, they'll be like, oh, actually, you know what, like,
every kid's going to put their hand on the hot stove, even though their mom told them not to put their hand on a hot stove, to realize why you don't put your hand on a hot stove. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think the reality with something like that is it's always this personal journey, which is you kind of have to go through everything, the striving, the success, and then the come down that comes afterwards. Sure. Like, you know, I have a lot of friends who've exited businesses, and I always wonder, like, you know, you spend so much of your time building what is like like almost like your own like child almost, and you've put so much soul and your heart in that, and then you give it away, and then it's such a big hole because it's like it's been so much of your own personality and sense of self, this like building and path. So I can't imagine that it's a really big transformation in terms of mindset, in terms of also your focus. So what is next then for you? Like, what is currently Adam doing, and like how what is the day-to-day looking like?
Yeah, I guess like one kind of quick companion to what you just said, because it kind of resonated with me. I think the biggest discovery I've made, and there's been a lot of changes in my life like the last 3 or 4 years across every dimension, is that I used to always think that like the wins and the achievements, like that is like, those are those little diamonds that make life's tertiary existence matter. Like, those are the things that, like, yes, like every once in a while the universe throws you these things, and those are the things to be cherished, and those are the things that show you that you're on the right track. I've also come to realize that the down periods, the resets, the suffering, the challenge, the things that don't go how you wanted them to go, those things are as beautiful and impactful as the wins are and the achievements are. And both of them do the exact same thing, which is they guide you to the next version or the ultimate version of the person that you're supposed to be. And so I think now I look at things like when I have challenging things happen or things don't go how I want. And again, I've always been kind of a planner, like literally just like taking the hands off the steering wheel. And I'm not trying to say you don't do things and you don't have willpower and all those other things, but like being like, look, this could be a good thing. Like, I don't know, like this feels bad and it sucks and I don't want this to happen in my life, but there's a reason, much like the wins, where it's preparing me for what I'm going to be doing next. And so I think that has been a painful process to come to that discovery. But for me, that's why I'm kind of like, I'm not like a nihilist, but like, I'm just like, yeah, like it's going to happen how it's going to happen. And my job is to pay attention to where I need to kind of steer myself, as well as to take those lessons to be a better person. So I think it ends well if you absorb that lesson the right way. And that was the hardest one for me to absorb. So in terms of what's next for me, I've still got a couple of physical products brands. I consult with a really large seller. That's been a really fun project for me to kind of play with the Amazon stuff at a 9-figure scale, which has been fun. The content stuff I'm still kind of doing, but I'm kind of thinking about what's next for me there. I think in the next 6 months, I'll kind of know whether it's worth it to double down or to go in a different direction. But I think ultimately, like across my life, I'm just trying to pay attention to what matters, to listen to that nudge that got me into Amazon in the first place, and that nudge that kind of played a role in my life to get me to doing the cool things and have the cool experiences that I've had, to be more attuned to listen to that and to let that guide where I go next. And yeah, it's simple. Like I talked about, like I want to have coffee in the morning, chill, think about life, play music, build cool businesses that I find fun, having a new puzzle piece within Amazon challenge to figure out, grabbing meals with friends, going to the places in the world that call me, and trying to be a good kind of human being where I can. So that's kind of what's next. It's not if you would ask me 2 years ago, I'd have been like this or this or this. Now I'm just kind of, yeah, let's roll with it and see what life has next.
Nice. Well, I think that's a beautiful place to end it. So I guess, Adam, do you want people to reach out to you? If so, where should they go? You know, is there any links you want us to share which we can do afterwards?
Yeah, I mean, nothing crazy. I think if like any content I've got on the Amazon specific stuff is going to be on Adam Heist. So if you just type in Adam Heist on YouTube, that's probably the best way to find me.
What's Heist, by the way?
Yeah, so it's funny. Joe asked me like, "Hey, what surname should I use?" So I was still working my executive day job at the time that I started doing YouTube content. Like Runquist is a bit of a mouthful. It's a Nordic last name, and I'm like, that was one reason. The main reason was I'm like, I'm still working a normal job. I kind of wanted to be incognito, which is hard to do when you're public.
Yeah.
And Heist for me is basically, at the time, it was like taking back your life.
Yeah.
And so it was kind of a metaphor for that, but it was mainly because I didn't want like my personal professional life to be fused with what I was doing publicly. In hindsight, I probably should have just used my real name to begin with, and it's kind of a hybrid between the two, but that's the origin of Heist.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Cool.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being our guest. It was a really interesting conversation.
Yeah, guys, love the questions. It's fun when you have business stuff, but like, I mean, this is all life anyway, so it's kind of fun when it gets into that. So I appreciate the questions, and it was a really enjoyable convo, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.